Mike Merriman Lotes. I'm the Just Peace Global Policy Director for the American Friends Service Committee, and I'm going to start out, and then I think Jennifer is going to take it over from me on some of the perspective from there, and hope that's okay. Yeah, actually, the Pentagon and the military budget is much higher than that even. We just this week released the budget estimate for the current fiscal year finally after months of dysfunction, and it'll be debated tomorrow. And so the numbers, the total numbers, were expected that came out there were $886 billion for the military, and $773 billion for all non-defense spending. But even those numbers, which are kind of baffling, are an underestimate of the amount of money that goes towards militarized spending in this country. For fiscal year 23 last year, our estimate was that 62% of the discretionary budget went towards military spending. That included $921 billion for the Defense Department, $135 billion for veterans benefits, $51 billion for Homeland Security, and another 32 for federal law enforcement. And that spending is enormous, but it also is important to understand that spending leaves only 38% of the total discretionary budget that Congress has control over for meeting all other human needs, for addressing housing, education, job training, infrastructure, the environment, diplomacy, all of those things. And just to put our spending into perspective, the US military spending, that amount that we're putting forward, accounts for 40% of total global military spending. So the US alone is 40% of that. And we spend more than the next 15 highest spending countries combined, including both rivals and allies alike. If we're looking, and this year, I think one of the things that's important to note is that the military portion of the budget is growing, while the rest of the budget is shrinking. So for this fiscal year, the proposal increased military spending by $26 billion, while cutting all non-military discretionary spending by $4 billion. And that's a mind-boggling, in many ways, amount of money. It's not all negative on the positive side of the spending bill. The bill that was just put forward adds in $1.3 billion in additional funding for the special supplemental nutrition and program for women, infants, and children. So WIC funding, the money that goes to ensure that young children, in particular, are not malnourished. And without that funding, without that additional $1.3 billion, the expectation this year was that 2 million parents would have lost their benefits. But to put that into perspective in terms of the choices that we're making, a single aircraft carrier for the military costs us $13 billion. So that's 8 times as much as the funding for 2 million parents and children to receive the food that they need to survive. So even really modest cuts would have a dramatic impact in the military, or reallocation towards non-military spending would have a dramatic impact on community needs. And we're seeing that at a time when needs are incredibly high right now. I think Gallup data that just came out showed that 63% of adults are saying that rising prices are a source of hardship for them. 23% of people interviewed said that last year they weren't able to pay their energy bill in full for the year, and those numbers are rising over the last couple of years. I think we all recognize that we are in a cost of living crisis, despite the economy being quite strong. People are really feeling the impact of inflation on goods that impact them, and yet the emphasis really over the last year in terms of where we've prioritized funding and needs is towards the military. And I think that's shown actually over some of the discussions that have happened around supplemental funding over the last couple of months, the last 5 months. At this, there were two different bills that were put forward by the administration late last year. One was for 95 billion in additional funding for Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. And another was for about 45 billion for disaster relief and support for childcare providers. And while we've heard a lot about the military funding bill, and there's been real pressure to have that passed, there's been absolutely nothing said by the administration and no push for the passage of that other bill. Well, the military bill was 69 pages of details. The request for funding for disaster relief and childcare funding was a 2-page summary. And those are the decisions that we've made with the way in which we prioritize funding. One of the proposals to address this is a bill called the People Over the Pentagon Act that was put forward by Representatives Barbara Lee and Representative Mark Pocan. And it calls for a $100 billion cut in military spending and a reprioritization of that funding to meet human needs. And the estimates that they put forward are that if we were to reprioritize that $100 billion, we'd be able to build 11.9 million public housing units for people around the country. You could hire 1.1 million elementary school teachers. You could create over 500,000 green energy or clean energy jobs, or you could ensure that 1 in 3 children between 0 and 5 are able to attend Head Start. You could also provide solar power for every single house in the country. And so with that amount of cut, if we were to just take out $100 billion from the military budget, for this year, we would still have within the budget a total that is higher than the current discretionary spending. You'd still be over $775 billion in military spending with a cut of 100 billion. We'd still be spending more than the next 10 countries combined on our military. One of the questions that often comes up when we talk about cutting the military budget is what is the impact of that on jobs? What does that do for the people who are dependent on that money? But the trade-off actually is that if we were to put that same money towards or the equivalent amount of money towards green energy jobs, you'd create 9% more jobs than in the arms industry. If you were to put that money towards education, you'd create 3 times as many jobs. And so there's a need to reprioritize and to see how can we invest in the creation of new and effective technologies and in many ways benefit our economy through investment in communities and in those needs. The other factor is that one of the drivers at this moment of the dramatic increase in military spending and a ramping up of weapons production is a concern about rivalry with China and other countries. But the reality is that I don't think that any of us want a war with China. None of us want a war with Russia. We want to find ways of diplomatically addressing those situations. But when we invest our money in weapons, those are the solutions that we then tend to look towards as we think about how we address conflict. And it's important to note that the total spending on both aid and diplomacy, the State Department and USAID last year was $56 billion. So that's about 5% of what we spent on the military. And as compared to in 2020, just a single contract with Lockheed Martin was for $75 billion, more than we spend on all diplomacy and foreign aid combined. And so those prioritizations say a lot about what it is that we are valuing as a country. The other key factor, and I'll kind of end after this and turn it over to Jennifer, is that as we think about how that money is spent, it's important to understand that there is a lack of accountability also within the Pentagon for how money is being spent. There's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse. Just earlier in November of 2023, the Pentagon failed its sixth consecutive audit. In the 2022 audit, it couldn't account for 61% of its assets, or where they were. Those are numbers that should shock us, and yet we continue to shovel money towards the military without demanding the kind of accountability that we demand from the rest of our of government. And this is not to say that we shouldn't be concerned about issues of security and peace building, but that continuing to put money after money towards the military and rapidly moving towards a $1 trillion budget create scarcity in other locations. And when we talk about how do we lower our deficit, how do we address human needs, one of the places that's never on the table is the military, despite it being the outside-sized portion of spending. And so if we really want to address environmental concerns, if we want to look at how do we deal with homelessness, how do we deal with healthcare crises, how do we improve the education system, a core part of how we can do that is through a reprioritization of our funding away from military spending and from that Pentagon budget towards other needs. And so I would again say that the People Over the Pentagon Act, or the Clean Audit Bill, which is also supported by Senator Sanders and Barbara Lee, are some of the processes that can be pushing for that within the political process. And I think it's just a matter of reminding those in leadership that there are ways of addressing needs without doing that necessarily through spending more on the military.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I won't talk for much longer here. I'm Jen Piper. I work in the Colorado office of the American Friends Service Committee. And in this office, we focus mainly on migration and educating the citizen community about the system that we have, and also supporting immigrants who are going through our immigration system or who are facing deportation. And I want to just echo a couple of things that Mike said. From our perspective, we really see the role of the military and the way in which our government exercises its influence over our neighbors in militarizing not just our own borders, but the borders south of us, and feeding into the root causes of migration. So when we look at why do people migrate, it's climate change, it's capitalistic pressure from the United States that cuts these same types of discretionary programs in other countries. And it's so kind of a global economy and who that privileges pushes migration, and then some of our foreign policies. So a lot of you may have heard about newcomers coming to the state of Colorado, and a lot of them are from Venezuela, which has had a lot of sanctions and a lot of their discretionary spending restricted. And then they also have to cross through several borders that are now very deadly, and ours being the last one. What I think is hopeful is on the migration side, we've been advocating to reduce the amount of funding under the Department of Homeland Security that some of the immigration agencies receive, and those agencies are very militarized. And we've been successful. And a lot of the ways in which we've been successful in keeping that budget from increasing, when we talk with Senator Hickenlooper and Senator Bennett, is pointing out that our membership feels very strongly that these monies should be spent on things that would better benefit Colorado. And I think that that's not something they often hear when people are talking with them about the budget. A lot of times we're talking about the needs that we have, but we're not talking about how specifically a pot of money could really change things. things. So when we were looking at this supplemental that Mike was just talking about, it had 14 billion more dollars in addition to the $25 billion Immigration and Border Patrol already get. With that money, we could build public housing for 1.6 million people. Or we could provide healthcare coverage to 3 million adults. We could support the resettlement of 2.8 million refugees. Here we are in Colorado arguing about, how to support 50,000 or around 40,000 people who've moved to this state over the last couple of years. We could add solar power to almost 40 million homes. Or for $14 billion, we could double the amount the US spends on non-military assistance abroad. So with $14 billion, we would be spending double the amount we spend right now to help people not have to leave where they're from. Nobody wants to walk across 7 countries and leave their country, their culture, their family, and their language. It's very much forced migration for lots of different reasons. And with a very small portion of these budgets, we can be addressing the root causes instead of just addressing how to integrate people once they're here. So what we've found is when we're able to press a little bit more and show some concrete examples, like we could pay for attorneys for every single person in immigration court. Right now, you don't get an attorney in immigration court if you can't pay for one. There's no public defender system in immigration courts. So concrete examples like that, when you're advocating with your senators, can go a long way to making them kind of stop and think twice about whether these increases are something their constituents really want. I think that it helps them pay attention and think through a little bit more and even have some points to offer to their colleagues. So we've been able to stop those increases over the last 5 years that have been proposed specifically for those immigration agencies. And I think I just wanted, even though these numbers sound really big and the problem of how we make choices about spending our money is large, I think it's refreshing and empowering, especially when they hear from people outside of Denver. A lot of these issues, even though we have membership across the state, when we talk with our senators, they often are saying, oh, that's just something people in Denver care about. And so I think you all in Longmont have a certain amount of power, when you do raise these questions, because they're not accustomed to hearing them. Or they tell us that they're not accustomed to hearing them from people outside of Denver. So I'll stop there and see if folks have questions. We can also share with the organizers of this event, like where we got all these numbers and stats from, so you can look them up yourself too.
That would be great to have that resource available to us because, the things that you're saying are kind of mind-blowing and overwhelming. And it's like I'm trying to take notes on some of these things. And so that would be great if you could provide those, the source of those statistics or a list of them.
I was furiously scribbling down notes myself. Very compelling information. Can you tell us the origin of the American Friends Service Committee, like how it all started?
Yeah. You want to take that, Mike?
Yeah. AFSC is a Quaker organization that works on peacemaking and social justice issues, both in the U.S. and internationally. It was founded in 1918 as a organization to provide alternate service to Quakers who were pacifists at the time, and so they provided humanitarian assistance in Europe through World War I, and then it's developed from that point. It also won the Nobel Peace Prize because of its work with the British Quakers in World War II, and particularly running kinder transports and humanitarian assistance, and continue to do work around the world.
So it all kind of makes sense, the stuff that you're talking about. And before the other questioners ask their questions, one comment I wanted to make is that it's interesting how we're all kind of connected in this democracy-based progressive community. Did you hear one of the candidates says he was raised as a Quaker, or his yeah,
No.
it's just incredible. I mean, we've never had an attendee say they were that, and then now you were talking about the Quaker roots of this organization. Okay, so it looks like Sherry has a question. Sherry?
Yeah, first, I just want to clarify that candidate said he was raised in a Quaker community, although he was not a Quaker.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was
But
good specifics.
so thank you for this. Yeah, I too have like a page and a half of copious notes and would love the data on that. It just kind of makes me sick, to be honest, to really look at the percentages. 62% is beyond who I think we are as a people. And if we take the idea that every dollar we spend is a reflection of our values, this doesn't align with our values as Democrats, and just as human beings. And so, but I would really love to, kind of get looped. I'm a member or supporter, so I get these action alerts, but maybe that's something that we could post on the LAD website regularly, that kind of thing, because we are people who want to kind of, really lean into things and not just talk about them. So that would be great if you could. And thanks so much for being here. It was absolutely fascinating. And one more thing, I often think, I thought, oh, I've got to write another letter to the editor. But the idea that, facts don't touch people's hearts, stories touch people's hearts. And so, how to sort of make that connection, which you do, but sort of still on the larger scale, in terms of how many homes might be built for people who are unhoused and whatnot. So, anyway, so those were just some thoughts. So thank you very much. It was really enlightening.
Looks like Stan and Beth.
My impression is that there's almost nothing that most politicians would fear more than an accusation of being soft on defense, soft on national security. How do you deal with such fearful politicians?
To me, I think it's reframing what we think will bring us security, and what helps both in our communities and internationally. We can build up walls, we can buy guns, we can invest in ensuring that we have the best defenses so that when the emergency arises, we are ready to defend ourselves or to beat off the masses that are coming to our borders, or that are coming to our communities. Or we can invest resources in looking at what is causing problems that might be arising or that might come into the future, and that investing on that front end is more efficient for us in various ways. As Jennifer was saying, that a doubling of our foreign assistance, which would be about the same cost as one aircraft carrier, would provide us aid in communities that would help stop people feeling the pressure that is pushing them to migrate, and would be a much more efficient way than increasing and spending billions of dollars on more police and militarism, or engaging in diplomacy with China might stop an arms race that could escalate and would go on for years, rather than spending years and years on weapons and the fear of a possible fight. I think we need to re-envision how it is that we go about security, and pressure them to on that, as all of us.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that I think it takes a sustained campaign. And it takes one that tells the story no matter who gets elected to that position. So for years and years, those budgets for immigration and customs enforcement and border patrol were like increasing and increasing. And I think, we started out with these kind of common sense arguments about why we didn't need them, and the inhumane treatment of people and the lack of accountability Mike mentioned, and it didn't really seem like we were getting very much of it anywhere because of that same fear. But I think one of the things that helps, and I think this People Over the Pentagon is really the beginning of this type of a movement for the larger military budget, it is to have every meeting with a politician that this group is having or that your groups are having mention, we're shocked that this is 62% of our discretionary budget, and that doesn't represent our values, and we want to see you do something about it, and what are you going to do about it? And really asking the question. And if you go to talk about healthcare, you should be saying, like, look, we spend 62% of the discretionary budget on the military, and I'd like to see us take some piece of that and put it towards healthcare. What do you think? Is that a possibility? Because I believe we're secure enough. I believe that we are probably, whatever you want to say about that, but they need to hear it from us consistently in order to get them to vote against these supplementals. And the last thing I wanted to say is, like, the president could take money from another part of the Department of Homeland Security and focus it on Israel or Palestine, which I would not agree with, or Ukraine military aid to somewhere. They should have to make the same choices that we have to make at our dinner tables about the bills that we pay, right? And Congress doesn't have to write the president a blank check for these types of things. And really pointing that out to them, I think being very firm about it, those are the things that helped us sort of stop that growth of those budgets. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's what we've seen here.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Virginia?
Okay, we have about 2.5 minutes left.
I just, thank you. I just was really shocked by the small amount that is used to help other nations, invest in other nations, considering how wealthy we are. And just a story that I heard in a documentary a few years ago is that this nonprofit group of ex-military people made it their mission to go into remote areas where people had been facing disasters and so forth, and help them out when their governments couldn't. And the thing that they highlighted was there was a huge earthquake in northern Afghanistan, and this was years ago, before the war, and they flew in and helped those people when nobody else could. And I just thought the work that they did will be remembered and revered for generations. Those people would be, forever grateful to us. And it just feels like, as you say, spending some of that money in the countries that have severe problems, helping with them with their problems would be a better investment. And I just was really surprised by the amount that you said that we spend on that. I guess that's all I have.
Beth, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So I was sitting here wondering and thinking that, I bet there's a whole lot of individual citizens in our country who do not want this kind of money spent in the way it's being spent. And it's very disturbing that even if our representatives and senators up at the U.S. Congress know that, they are not paying any attention to us. They are paying attention to the defense contractors and all the people with the money. do you have that impression? And how do you think we can, make the voice louder against this kind of spending, because we don't feel safer when they do that?
Yeah, I can just very quickly. I mean, I think that all of you speaking is really important. I've just taken over. I've switched positions in AFSC just a few months ago, and have just started into this portfolio. But I'd really like. I mean, one of the things that I'm looking at figuring out how do we emphasize is this idea of reprioritizing funding, and how do we build up a grassroots movement that is pushing for that, because it impacts all aspects of our life. And I think that people power is really powerful, that the grassroots movements in our political parties on both sides, and the grassroots movements in our communities do have a lot of influence, do have an ability to shape things. And so just calling your offices, writing them an email, all of that has an impact, and does help counteract those big players with deep pockets.
Well, I'm just so glad that you guys have come to speak with us tonight, because so much of what you said is obviously resonating with a lot of us. And so any project or messaging that you want us to put out there, we're happy to support it. So thanks so much. Are we, Ingrid, how are we on time?
Well, we've
I
used
hear
up
that?
our time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all for gathering people so regularly, and for your interest and your great questions.
Yes, LAD is celebrating its 21st year, if you can believe that. The little club that could, I think.
That's awesome.